welcome in everyone to another edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, as always, Tommy Brzee. It is Thursday, September 12th around here, and we have a great show for you today. We're going to do a ton of breakdowns of games. I'll give my picks on some games, and we're going to start with a couple of SEC matchups this upcoming weekend. A&M heads down to Gainesville to face off against Florida in a game that really both of them need to win. Then we'll get Georgia at Kentucky for the second one there, and then we'll get to the second segment. We'll get into LSU out South Carolina, the game day game for this week, as well as Tulane going up to Norman to face off against the Sooners. Really fun matchups there that we'll break down. Then we have a couple of old Pac-12 matchups. We'll get into Oregon State at Oregon, as well as Washington State heading to Seattle to play Washington. Two really fun matchups against some teams that have a little bit of anger towards each other right about now. And then we'll get into some questions heading into Week 3. We did these yesterday. We'll continue them today. And then I have a couple of hot takes as we head into Week 3. A couple of things that I think might just happen this week that might just be a little bit out there. But before we jump in, I do want to remind you all we get tons of questions and comments throughout the show, and the best way for you all to get your question on the screen, we can have a fun back and forth here, is to use the tip and donation link at the bottom of the screen, gsmcpodcast.net. That is another way to do it. You can use that gsmcpodcast.net page if you would like. You can also use the super chat that is at the bottom of the chat, that little $sign. If you click on that, you can add any question, any comment you like, and it will pop up on the screen, and we can have a fun back and forth here. And definitely want this to be as interactive as possible, so definitely utilize that. But let's go ahead and jump in here because we have a ton of picks to get to today. And we'll start with the game that's going on down in Gainesville, Florida this weekend, in a game that might just be must-win for both of these teams. Both of these teams are in such a weird spot as they head closer and closer to the meat of their schedule that a lot of them are going to have big-time questions. A lot of the fans are going to have big-time questions if they can't figure it out very quickly. So both these teams are walking in knowing that this is a huge game on their schedule, and if it goes wrong, then there's going to be a lot of fans that have a lot of questions, particularly around Florida, but A&M as well is going to have a ton of pressure on them in this game. But Elijah Badger is the first guy I want you guys to watch because I think this is a game where it sounds like Eugene Wilson is questionable right now. So if he does go, probably not out of the 100%. You need someone else to pick up that slack. Aiden Mizell is another great option here, but I think Elijah Badger brings something to this offense. He's getting more and more comfortable by the game, so I think he's going to be a dangerous player and definitely someone that can have a big-time effect on this game. And then this A&M O-line is where you want to attack them. And Tyreek Sapp is one of the few healthy edge rushers that they have. It sounds like TJ Searcy might just be out for this game as well, so they're going to need to find it somewhere. And Tyreek Sapp is likely the person that's going to have to do that. And it's going to be really interesting to see how they attack this A&M offensive line that has really struggled thus far. But I tend to believe Tyreek Sapp is going to have his handprint on this game if Florida's going to want to walk out there with a win. But Noah Thomas, they just have to get going over there at A&M. I don't know how this guy has not gotten the ball more often. He's 6'6", he can run all over the field, does really dangerous stuff, and you got a couple of wide receiver injuries right about now. So I would get the ball to this guy as consistently as you possibly can on Saturday because he is the big-time matchup problem for Florida going into this game, and I think he just needs to get the ball way more often for A&M going forward. And then Cassius Howell. We talked about the offensive line for A&M. The offensive line for Florida is downright rough as well. And I think Cassius Howell is going to get a lot of one-on-ones because a lot of attention is going to go Nick Scourton's way, that he might just be free to get those one-on-ones, and he can really dominate a good one-on-one. So a very, very talented player, one of those guys that hasn't quite hit the big-time ceiling that A&M had for him, but still getting accustomed to things. And I think this game could be kind of a coming-out party for Cassius Howell. But let's get into how Florida can pull off this upset. Obviously, the spread is only 4 in this game, so wouldn't be all that crazy if Florida was able to get this one done, especially being at home. But the biggest thing for me is let one quarterback lead the way. It sounds like Billy Napier is going to roll with Graham Mertz as the starter in this game, and I tend to believe that's the right way to go. I think Graham Mertz is the more confident, more comfortable option of the two, especially in a game where you have a very good defensive coach on the other side of the field, and we'll actually get into that here in a second. But the reality is I do think you have to have one of these guys leading the way, the other guys being a supplemental piece or a break glass in case of emergency type piece. I think DJ Lagway is capable of getting them a win here, but at the end of the day, I don't think they should be rotating these guys drive after drive, because then no one can get comfortable in that offense. And against a defense that is plenty good on its own, you don't want to give them any extra help. So it's going to be a little bit of a tightrope walk, but they have to find a way to figure it out. And then attack this O-line. I think A&M's O-line is the place that you want to go at. There's so many different things that you can attack at this group, and I think when you have Shamar James, when you have Tyreek Sapp, like we just talked about, there's so many guys that they can throw at them, but they might just want to get a little bit more dynamic. We saw what Connor Wegman had to deal with in the first week against Notre Dame. If you can heat him up, then I don't know if they have a full answer on offense. So if you can attack this O-line, if you can get after Connor Wegman, then all of this stuff for the A&M offense that has looked clunky in the first couple of weeks will look very, very clunky on Saturday. So we'll figure out what happens there, but I think you're going to have to collapse this pocket just a little bit to make Connor Wegman just a little bit uncomfortable to get this win. And then finally, don't let the crowd fall out of it. This is where the Miami game was lost largely. I think when you look at that game, there were a lot of fans that were coming into the season with hope. They were trying to buy themselves into what Florida can do this season. And then they just get kind of railroaded, and a lot of the energy was sucked out of that building very quickly, and they couldn't get back into it. And I think you have to make sure that, at the very least, give them a reason to stick around. Don't give them a reason to leave like a turnover or something crazy early on in this game. Try to go down and get a score, and then you have the entire swamp behind you. So it's going to be really interesting to see how they handle this. And then for the matchups, it's weirdly Billy Napier against his own situation. They're going to have to figure out how to rotate these guys as efficiently as they can, because it sounds like they want to play both. I don't necessarily love the idea, but it is an absolute tightrope walk for Billy Napier this upcoming weekend, and he's going to have to deal with it. And then Mike Elko versus DJ Lagway. Obviously, Graham Mertz is getting the start, but when DJ comes in that game, you best believe Mike Elko is going to try to cause a lot of problems for him. He's going to try to confuse him with coverages and get after him with the pass rush, and if he can, then maybe you get that one mistake that makes the difference. And then finally, the Florida wide receiver against the A&M DBs. I think these Florida wide receivers can get over top. They can get behind you, and especially with someone like DJ Lagway on the field, he can get him the ball deep down the field. So you're going to have to make sure you keep everything in front and tackle really efficiently in this game, because there are a couple of guys that'll make you pay in a hurry if you do not. But overall, I think Florida's just got too many questions for me to fully buy in. I really thought about picking Florida in this spot, I'm not going to lie to you, but I think with the quarterback situation going on, I think A&M's defense is going to play good enough, but it's going to be a pretty gross game from both these guys. I think they're going to both walk out feeling not so great, although A&M will get the win, so that'll subside that just a little bit. But let's keep it moving here. I do have A&M getting that win in Gainesville, huge conference win for them. But another conference game going on in the SEC, Georgia heading up to Lexington to face off against Kentucky. Kentucky has not gotten a win in this game since 2008 when Randall Cobb was running the offense. So it's been a little bit of time, but they're going to have to figure out how they can fix what happened last week and try to get on the right side of this thing, because it has been an absolute beatdown. Georgia's favored by 24 points right about now, and I don't necessarily think that's all that crazy. But they're going to have to figure out a way to get Brock Vandagriff going, and we'll see if they can do it. But guys to watch, Jamori Macklin is super important in this game. Brock Vandagriff needs to get going. Brock Vandagriff needs comfortable targets, and he is one of them. He has to be a guy that they can go to and feel confident in, and if he's not, if he can't get open against this back end, then Brock Vandagriff's not going to have a ton of places to go with the football, and he's going to have to start pushing it into some very uncomfortable situations. And then Zion Childress on the back end of this Kentucky defense. I think you talk about Georgia, they're going to try to spread you out. They're going to try to push the ball downfield whenever they get those opportunities. Childress is going to be huge in this game, both in run support, but also just keeping everything in front of him, making sure that he's reading Carson Beck's eyes, and then maybe getting that one pick that could possibly turn the tides. And then Lawson Lucky, I think, has become a really interesting player for Georgia because it's kind of zigging when everyone else is zagging. There's so many people to keep track of on this Georgia offense, so many wide receivers, so many running backs, and a couple of tight ends that you would think of before Lawson Lucky, that he's able to just sneak out there and get easy gains pretty comfortably. And I think that could be the game plan for Georgia. Let all of the wide receivers run crazy and then let these tight ends actually do the work of catching the ball and getting upfield. And then Jalen Walker, just such a dangerous player and one of those guys that if Kentucky had problems with Dylan Stewart a week ago and Kyle Kennard, I think Jalen Walker and Mykel Williams are going to have plenty to say, although I'm not sure if Mykel Williams is going in this game. He very well could not be, but Jalen Walker is going to do plenty to cause problems for that offensive line, and if he can get home at the same rate those two last week did, then it's going to be a problem for Kentucky. What Kentucky needs to do to win this one, Barrion Brown has to put on a show. He is the one guy that can change this game, both on offense and in special teams, and he's one of those guys that, frankly, you can have him perfectly played. You can play the perfect defense. He might just run away from you. So you have to make sure that this guy is under wraps, and for Kentucky, you got to make sure you get this guy going early and often. And if you don't, then you might just be in a little bit of trouble. And then slow this UGA run game as best you can. Now, this is no guarantee because Carson Beck can still dice you up pretty good. But the reality is if you let UGA run on you, the game is over. There's no reality where you're able to win this game if Georgia's able to impose their will throughout it. So you're going to have to live with the pass. You're going to have to live with the ball in Carson Beck's hands. Now, it's a nightmare of a situation where you have to pick between the two, but the reality is you're going to have to make sure that a mistake happens, and when that ball's in the air, you have a better chance of that mistake happening than when it's on the ground. That is for sure. And then, finally, force that mistake. You got to force that mistake early. You have to be playing out in front in this game because if you're playing from behind, you have no shot to win it. I'm just being totally honest. Georgia's going to be able to keep everything in this offense under wraps, and you're not going to be able to get anything going, and then the crowd is going to fall out of this thing very, very quickly. So they got a lot of things to figure out, but get that mistake early, see what happens on the back end. But some matchups to watch that I think are really interesting. The Georgia O-line against the Kentucky D-line, two very good groups across the country, one of the two of the best groups across the country in these two categories, and I think it's going to be a really fun fight. Whoever wins this one is likely going to have a huge advantage in this game, and Kentucky likely needs to win this one if they want any shot in this game. The Georgia running backs against the Kentucky linebackers. Kentucky has a lot of athletic linebackers that can go out and guard a running back, can do a lot of the things you need them to do, and I think they're plenty up for the task, but you have some very dynamic guys in that Georgia running back room, as you always do, so this is going to be an interesting battle, both running the ball and out of the backfield catching it. And then Brock Vandagriff facing off against his former head coach is going to be one of the more fascinating things this weekend. It's something that has started to happen in college football as the transfer portal has become more prevalent. We saw it with Riley Leonard against Mike Elko a couple of weeks ago, and that offense did not necessarily get going, and I don't necessarily expect anything different from Kentucky. I think Kirby Smart has a very good plan for the quarterback that he knows very, very well during his time at Georgia, but this one's a beatdown. I'm having a hard time seeing it any other way at this very moment. I think Georgia goes to work in this game. I think they prove to everyone they are still the number one team in the country, and anyone talking about Texas in that position is a little bit goofy. So I think they're definitely sending a message in this one and starting their SEC play the way that they normally do, which is beating someone by a ton. So I expect Georgia to win that one pretty comfortably, and we got a couple of really good ones there. I think the SEC getting underway this week adds a very, very interesting aspect to this week where a lot of these games could affect the rest of the year in the SEC, but we have one more for you next segment where we talk about LSU at South Carolina as well as Tulane heading up to Norman to play the new SEC team in Oklahoma. So we'll break those down right after this, so stick with us.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign.
I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown. Get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about a couple of SEC matchups, A&M at Florida. I do have A&M in that game, but don't necessarily love either team at this very moment. And then we did Georgia at Kentucky. I just think this one's going to be a beatdown. I think Kentucky is reeling in. Georgia is Georgia right about now, so I'm not necessarily going to overthink that one. Let's get into a couple others. We have another SEC game for you. LSU going to South Carolina, the game day game of the week. I think they should be elsewhere, but that's just my opinion. I think Tulane at OU is another really, really fun one this weekend that we're going to break down here as well. But let's get into LSU at South Carolina first. LSU favored by a touchdown in this one. 49.5 is the over-under. This is a funny game. These are two very, very interesting teams that they're coming in kind of weirdly from two different directions, although they're both 1-1, but they're coming in from two very different directions where South Carolina's played really good football a week ago, played really bad football in week one. LSU has played kind of somewhere in the middle of the road both weeks. I think the defense obviously still has big time questions. The offense looks like an LSU offense right about now. So I think it's one of those things where you're coming in. I think Billy Napier has a lot of LSU fans asking questions. Shane Beamer will have a lot of Gamecock fans asking questions if they don't win this one. So it's going to be really interesting to watch the fallout from this one more than anything else. And the big one to watch is obviously this pass rush against this O-line, and we'll get to that throughout this one. But Mazeo Bennett is someone I want you guys to watch in this game. South Carolina has not had a lot of production from their outside wide receivers, and they're going to need more in this game. There's no doubt about it. The LSU defense is not great. The only real way they're going to be able to fully beat them is to stretch them out. They're going to have to be able to make sure that the DBs have to stay deep, that Sage Ryan and his friends cannot come down into the box and make it really, really tough for you to run the ball, because then you really have no offense if you're South Carolina. So Mazeo Bennett, a lot of these other guys on the outside just have to get going early in this game, or LSU just going to be able to stack the box, and South Carolina is going to be really tough sledding for a lot of this game against a defense that they should be able to take advantage of for the most part. And then on the other side, Nick Amenwari is a very talented player, was SEC Defensive Player of the Week last week and did just ridiculous things during that Kentucky game. But this is a very talented player, one of those guys that is going to be tasked with keeping up with Kyron Lacey for a lot of this game. And that's going to be a huge, huge aspect where Kyron Lacey is probably going to be, well, Harold Perkins is on that football field, but one of the best football players on the field on Saturday, and he's going to get a lot of that load. So cannot wait to see how he handles it, and that's one of the big-time matchups in this game throughout it. And then Caleb Jackson for LSU. You have to get this run game going if you're LSU. For whatever reason, they have not been able to get it going. Well, I know some of the reasons. The O-line has not been playing nearly good enough, and these running backs, although very talented and solid guys, not necessarily LSU-level running backs. I think Caleb Jackson is a very dangerous player. He's going to have to take some steps forward. And then you have Josh Williams, who's a little bit more experienced, but not quite as athletic as you would like. So it's kind of a balancing act. You're going to have to do running back by committee. Hate that John Emery got injured, because I think this would look a lot better with him in that room. But finally, Harold Perkins. I think we all understand this one. Whenever you play Lenora Sellers, that very athletic linebacker becomes all that much more important. So I don't know if this is a pass rush type scheme for him going forward. I don't know if he's going to play a little bit more in the spy position and just make sure that Lenora Sellers' legs don't become a factor. Whatever he does, he's going to have to be great doing it. And this defense is going to have to rely on him a lot. As we talked about going into the season, he might have more pressure on him than any defensive player in the entire country right about now. But let's get into how South Carolina can pull off this upset, and there's a lot of different things they can do. Obviously, this crowd is going to be into it. I didn't put that on here because I don't think it's going to be a problem to keep them engaged. It looks like it might be a little bit rainy, so definitely something to watch there. But overall, if this fan base is who I think they are, they're going to be loud as can be on Saturday, and you're going to see a very fun spectacle in Columbia, South Carolina. But let's get into, you got to keep LSU's defense on the field. We know that LSU's offense is as dangerous as can be. We know that they have so many different guys that can cause you issues, and this defense already has a million different questions. So run the ball. Make it really, really tough for them to get off the field on third down, because you have a 3rd and 3 instead of a 3rd and 7 where Lenora Sellers has to throw the ball. And I think it's one of those things also, your defense is very, very dangerous on the other side. That being said, you have two edge rushers that have to be high effort, high intensity players every single down throughout this game. If Dylan Edwards and Kyle Kennard are not heard from, they're going to South Carolina has no shot to win this game. Just plain and simple. They have to be big-time players, and you got to give them a little bit of time to rest, a little bit of time to reset and be 100 when they get in there to go on their reps, because if they don't take them 100%, then these offensive linemen that are first-round picks might just eat them alive. But also, be variable in this pass rush. I love Dylan Stewart. I love Kyle Kennard. I think they're both very, very dangerous people. If you attack these offensive tackles one-on-one, they're not going to win as much as South Carolina needs them to win. Just plain and simple. I think they're both very talented guys, and they've made a lot of guys look dumb through the first couple of weeks. But the reality is, these are two first-round talents at offensive tackle. You're going to have to be a little bit more variable. So use twists, use stunts, use a ton of different things to get these guys matched up on a DJ Chester, or get these guys matched up on a Garrett Dellinger, and make it maybe a little bit easier for them to use those pass rushing skills the way that they're meant to be used. So it's kind of just being variable, being multiple at the point of attack, and making Nussmeier not really know where Dylan Stewart is going to come from on these pass rushes, because if he just keeps coming right at Emory Jones or right at Will Campbell, I don't know how much of a success rate he's going to have, and I don't know if it's going to be enough for South Carolina to get this one done. And then finally, Lenore Sellers' athletic ability needs to take over this game. This LSU defense has so many questions, and if you can get them off platform, if you can get them on plays that are a little bit longer, a little bit more drawn out, they're going to struggle. I can almost promise you that. So Lenore Sellers getting out of the pocket, making something happen with his legs, whether it's a throw or a pass, making this defense have to guard for just a couple of seconds more in this game is going to be absolutely huge, and could get this crowd a little bit more involved if they see Lenore Sellers running free down the sideline. So it's going to be awesome to watch this, but they badly need that athletic ability from their quarterback if they're going to get this one done. And then some matchups to watch. I think, obviously, we talked about this offensive tackle group between Will Campbell and Emory Jones. It's going to be really hard to get through this group. But whatever they put together on the defensive side of the ball, it's going to have to be really, really nuanced and really aggressive. And then you also just have guys that could go at these guys and win a couple of battles. I don't think they're going to win quite as consistently as you need to, so you're going to have to be a little bit more variable. But every now and then, Dylan Stewart can probably win a matchup against one of these guys, which is outright terrifying in and of itself. But moving on, the SC run game against the LSU front seven is huge. The LSU front seven is not very strong right about now, and South Carolina is going to attack you in the run game. There is really no other option for them in this game. If they're going to get anything going, it's going to be on the ground. So LSU is going to have to be up for the challenge. JVR Suggs and a lot of these other guys on the front seven are just going to have to be huge. Harold Perkins included in that. So it's going to be a lot of run game for South Carolina, and if this LSU linemen as well as linebackers do not come ready to play, then they might just be able to run all over you with Lenore Sellers and Rocket Sanders. And then finally, Blake Baker against Lenore Sellers is going to be fascinating. I'm so curious to see how he uses Harold Perkins, how he uses Major Burns, how he uses a lot of these other guys around his defense to combat the athletic ability of that kid, because there's obviously a way to beat him. Keep him in the pocket, make him be a pocket passer, and you're probably going to have a lot of success, but it's not all that easy to keep him in the pocket and make him a pocket passer because of his athletic ability. So that's going to be a really, really fun matchup, and I tend to believe Blake Baker is going to win it just enough. I think this LSU team has a million questions, and I think they have to figure out a lot of it. I also think South Carolina last week was just playing really good football at the right time. I'm not taking anything away from that win. It was very impressive what they did, but at the end of the day, I don't necessarily see it as a trend for South Carolina. I see it as a very, very good week of football. So I think LSU gets this one done. I think it's a very fun one, a little bit down to the wire, but I think LSU has enough offense to get this one done. Moving forward to Tulane going up to Norman to play Oklahoma. This is a really interesting game. Tulane coming off a game against Kansas State where they didn't quite get the win, but they proved that at the very least they belong. They proved that they can play on the same field with some of these players, so they're coming in with a little bit of confidence into this one. I think Tulane has some defensive issues. Oklahoma has some offensive issues. So it's going to be a very, very interesting game to see how all of this plays out, and that over-under is one of the more confusing numbers in the entire market because no earthly idea which way this game is going to go, but Jackson Arnold's got to be able to get going in this one. There is no world where this team is going to be able to do much of anything in the SEC if they can't get that guy going, especially throwing downfield, and right now, the O-line's giving him no shot to do that. So a lot of things need to change in this game, and I think Deion Burks is going to have to get involved. When you talk about pushing the ball downfield, that's what Oklahoma wanted to do this season. That's why Dillon Gabriel is at Oregon right now, because he couldn't necessarily push the ball downfield the same way that Jackson Arnold can. Deion Burks is the guy they brought in to do that. Deion Burks is the guy they said, he is going to be our deep threat. He is going to be the one that gets behind defenses while everyone else is chasing around Nick Anderson and Jaleel Farouk and all of these other guys. Problem is those guys are injured now, so you're going to have to find a way to scheme this guy open. You're going to have to find a way to get the ball in his hands, because he is as dangerous as can be with the ball in his hands, especially against a back end that has some big-time holes in two lanes. And then Billy Bowman is one of the best safeties in the entire country, one of those guys that plays so instinctively, so smart, one of those just impossible to avoid, really, defenders for Oklahoma. And I think in this game, there's so many wide receivers on that back end for Tulane that you're going to have to keep up with, that he's just going to have to be a really good general of this defense. He's going to have to communicate with that back end really efficiently. He's going to have to make sure everyone is aligned. And then when people aren't in their position, he's going to be the one that's likely called on to make those plays. So there's going to be a lot of opportunities for him to do that, because Tulane is going to push the ball downfield. But if he can't make at least a couple of plays in this game, maybe the Tulane offense gets their feet under him a little bit more than we're expecting. And then Mario Williams. We have to talk about this guy making his way back to Norman for, I believe, the first time since he's left there. I have to imagine the first time, and it's going to be really interesting to watch this one. This is a very talented receiver, has over 250 yards receiving this year so far, and he's one of those guys that can change the game on a dime. And Brent Venables and a lot of the OU players know that very, very well. They know how dangerous this guy is, and they got to make sure that they keep him under wraps, because he could totally change everything. He could play at a Power 5 school right now, but he just happens to be playing for the Green Wave, and they're coming up to Norman with a chance to get a big-time win. And then Patrick Jenkins is another guy to watch. This OU O-line obviously has had a lot of troubles, and this is the guy on the interior that could cause a lot of those troubles in this game. I think he's such a forceful guy, one of those that could really shut down this run game that has had a ton of trouble, and especially on that interior, the O-line is just all over the place. So if you can attack them in that point, then you're going to have a lot of success, and I think Patrick Jenkins is likely the guy that's going to have to do that for Tulane. How can Tulane pull off this upset? Just get enough from the run game. You have so many dangerous players on that defense for Oklahoma that you're going to have to be able to pull Billy Bowman or pull Peyton Bowen down into the box and then be able to pass over top of them. There's no world where you're going to be able to take on this back end just one-on-one. I'm just being totally honest. I think you might be able to find openings here and there. You're not going to be able to do it for 4 quarters. So pull Danny Stutzman a little bit lower in the box. Pull Billy Bowman down into the box, or Peyton Bowen, who a little bit more fits that mold. But the reality is, just get a little bit from Mekhi Hughes. Get a little bit from this offensive line, and then do what you do, which is spread these guys out and use these wide receivers that are just downright special to your advantage. And then sell out on the pass rush. That is the big-time thing for me, where you know how bad this group is. You know that OU has had troubles against pretty much everyone they face, regardless of how bad that pass rush is. And Tulane's is not all that great. They have 2 sacks on the entire season, but Temple came in there and had 3 sacks on the day against Oklahoma. So it's a reality where you can still attack them and still get openings and still get Jackson Arnold on the ground. So I think this is really the only way to do it. If you're going to let Jackson Arnold have even a little bit of time back there, he's going to tear you to pieces. I'm just being totally honest. So you're going to have to make sure you get to him, and the only real way Tulane's going to be able to do that is attack with a couple extra guys on a number of downs throughout this game. And then finally, just get a mistake. Get one mistake on that back end of that defense, and frankly, if you're heating the guy up the way that you want to in this game by selling out against the pass rush, you should be able to have a shot. But the reality is, if you can't get this going, if you can't get a mistake, and this OU fan base gets really involved, especially if they get that big play downfield from Jackson Arnold, you have no shot in this game. They want this big-time play every single week, and they have not gotten it yet. If they get in this game, this place will explode in a hurry. So you're definitely going to want to keep a cap on that. Some matchups to watch. The Oklahoma O-line just has to play well in this game. I don't know how they have not played at least a little bit better throughout this first couple of weeks, but this is a front seven that they should be able to handle, no doubt about it. And if they can't, then Tennessee's coming to town, and they are going to tear you to pieces, just plain and simple. And then the Tulane wide receivers against this Oklahoma back end. We've talked about this a little bit. The Tulane wide receivers are really the only even keel position that that Tulane has with Oklahoma. It's the only place where you look at Tulane's guys and you feel like, okay, a couple of those guys could play on Oklahoma right about now. So you're going to have to utilize those guys a ton throughout this game. And then finally, John Summerall against Jackson Arnold. How does he heat this guy up? How does he make him uncomfortable? And can he force a couple of mistakes from the kid? Because he wasn't necessarily able to all that consistently against Kansas State a week ago, but this is a dangerous O-line that could cause a lot of issues for this Oklahoma offense if they do not come ready. But I am going to pick Oklahoma to win. I still think Oklahoma walks out of this one feeling a little bit frustrated with the offensive performance. I still think they have a lot of questions heading into that Tennessee game, but I do think they avoid a big-time upset here and are able to get that win. And then we'll see what happens in SEC play. They still have a ton of questions, and maybe they're answered this weekend, but I would feel very confident to venture to say that it is not going to happen in terms of them being able to totally fix those problems. But I am picking them to win. It's going to be a very interesting game, but I do think OU gets it done at the end of the day. But let's take our second break here, and when we come back, we got to talk about these old Pac-12 matchups that just got a little bit more interesting last night. So we'll break it down right after this, so stick with us.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Alrighty, welcome back, everyone. We just broke down the game day game of the week with South Carolina LSU going to South Carolina. I do think LSU wins that one by 7. Very close game, but I think LSU does just enough. And then we got into Tulane. I think OU wins that one. I think the defense is too tough for Tulane to really find too many openings in this one, and the Sooners get a much-needed win as they head into SEC play. But let's get into a couple of the former matchups that we saw in the Pac-12 that we very much missed, but glad to see them back on the schedule, even though it's not in the normal time of the year that we're used to. But let's get into these real quick, and Oregon State is a very fun one. I think this is the one that is probably a little bit more far-fetched to see that upset for Oregon State, but doesn't mean they're not coming into this one thinking they can win it. I love seeing this one on the schedule, really want this one to be on there for quite some time, and we'll see what happens, especially with a lot of the changes happening around the Pac-12 right now that we will get into tomorrow. I promise you there are a lot of things going on over there that we have to make sure you guys know about, but at the end of the day, this is a very fun game, and just can't wait to see those two jerseys on the field as much as often going forward. But the guys to watch, Jamias Griffin, very, very talented player. One of those guys, he started his career at Georgia Tech, was a Georgia Tech Gatorade Player of the Year, I believe, when he came out of high school, going to Georgia Tech, and then didn't quite work out the way that he wanted to, got a little bit stuck behind Jahmyr Gibbs, I won't lie to you, but a very talented guy that can absolutely play and has done really good work through a couple of years over there at Oregon State. I expect him to be a huge part of this game plan on Saturday. And then Skylar Thomas is someone that has been through this. He's been at Oregon State for a couple of years. He saw what Oregon did the last couple of years, and he saw them walk out the door. He is coming into this game with a little bit more energy than just about anyone else in that locker room. Cannot wait to see what this kid does, and I have a inkling that he is going to be shot out of a cannon that first play. But cannot wait to see what he does this game. And then Tez Johnson, you have to get more involved. This Oregon team, he has 15 catches for 80 yards. This is one of the most dynamic, explosive players in the entire country, and not being able to utilize him downfield is killing this Oregon offense. They have to be able to push the field with him and then let Evan Stewart do what he does, which is work underneath, be a tactician, and then catch the ball and get upfield. They have to be able to get Tez Johnson downfield in this game, and if they can't, then it might just be an issue that follows them the entire year. And guess what? If you can't stretch out this Ohio State defense, they are going to suffocate you and make your offense look downright anemic on that Saturday. So get this guy involved as quickly as possible on Saturday, and then let him get downfield. Throw those big-time passes that Dillon Gabriel does struggle to throw, but he's got to be able to pull the trigger in some moments and get this guy going, because he's way too dangerous of a player to have 80 yards through 2 weeks. That is for sure. And then Jordan Burch. I think when you talk about this Oregon State team, there are so many different things to take into account, but the run game is going to be huge. And I think when you have that edge rusher that can keep everything kind of contained, can keep everything pushed towards the interior guys of Derek Harmon and Jamari Caldwell, you're going to have a lot of success. And this is a guy that can essentially just wreck the game from start if he were to get a pick or a fumble six or something like that. But at the end of the day, I think if they can't get this guy out of the game, they have very little shot to win this one. And then also, if you can't slow this game down, you have no shot to win this one. I think Oregon State has a very fun running back duo of Jam Griffin and Anthony Hankerson, and both those guys are really, really fun. They're very experienced players. They know exactly what they need to do in this offense. They have to slow this game down. They know that they are going to be relatively outmatched all over the place when Oregon's offense comes on the field. So they're going to have to make sure this game is as slow as can be, and then get a couple of turnovers, which is how you get them, is you put them in obvious passing downs. That's the way that they're going to have to go about playing this game. Dillon Gabriel has not been good about pushing the ball downfield really throughout his career, but particularly this year it's been downright terrible. And you're going to have to put him in 3rd and 8, 3rd and 12, 3rd and 10, and then force him to push the ball just a little bit downfield, because then a mistake could happen. If you're Oregon State, you're going to need a couple of mistakes in this game, and the real only way to do that, in my opinion, is force this team to throw downfield in a way that they have not been able to thus far. And then finally, use that extra energy. There's so much pent-up energy in this program right now against Oregon and against all the teams that left them behind. Use all of that. Use your fans' energy. Trent Bray, it came up from the DC role to take over the head coaching job. He knows what this is about. All of the fans know what this is about, and a lot of the players on that field know what this is about. Use all of that energy. Use all of that anger that is pent up for the last little bit and has made you really stew against this team. Use all of it on Saturday and see if you can come out with a win. And then some matchups to watch. Obviously, these Oregon wide receivers are going to be a lot for this Oregon State back end, but they're going to have to be able to hold up at least a little bit. It doesn't have to be perfect, because the reality is you're not going to play Tez Johnson and Evan Stewart and be perfect on that back end. That's just the reality. But if you can keep these guys under wraps just a little bit, if you can keep especially a cap on this team and not let them get over top and take this crowd out of the game, you're going to have a lot of success. So you're likely not going to outright win this matchup if you're Oregon State, but if you can go punch for punch at the very least, then you're going to have a lot of success. And then the Oregon State front seven against the Oregon O-line is fascinating, because the Oregon State front seven isn't necessarily the strongest group in the world. The Oregon O-line has just looked downright terrible through a couple of weeks, and you're going to have to find a way to get after them the first couple of drives, and if you can, then Dillon Gabriel starts to think about things, and he starts to force balls where he doesn't need to, and he starts to get the ball out a little bit earlier when he doesn't need to, and then mistakes can happen. So you're going to have to get out this O-line that has had real struggle stopping just about anyone right about now. So it's going to be really interesting to watch, and especially if Oregon wants to get that run game going. If the Oregon State front seven is up to the challenge, then they're not going to be able to, and it's going to be fascinating to watch that unfold. And then finally, Jeffrey Bossa and these Oregon linebackers against this duo for Oregon State out of the backfield. These guys are so dynamic, so dangerous, and they have so many guys that can cause you big-time problems. I realize I have Carson Bruner down there. Do not mean to have Carson Bruner down there, but a very talented group over at Oregon nonetheless, and they're going to have their hands full, no doubt about it, with this run game. And if they let these running backs get going, then Oregon State has a real shot in this game. But I think Oregon makes a statement this week. I think they prove everyone that They are the team that we all thought they were going into the season. They are not the team that we saw in the first couple of weeks. I think it was more of a mentality thing than anything else. And I'll get into this a little bit later in the show as well. But I do expect Oregon to win this one pretty comfortably and kind of shoot themselves back up into that conversation for the title. Moving on to Washington State, the Apple Cup as they call it. Cannot wait for this one because it's basically a Pac-12 game. It's not like Washington went off and, got all this talent and Washington State was absolutely gutted. These are two teams pretty much where they were a year ago, where Washington is favored by about 4.5 points. They were probably favored by more a year ago with all of the changes that have happened over there. But I think this is going to be a very interesting matchup because you have one team in Washington State that is going to try to run the ball with their quarterback, with their running backs. They're going to try to be able to slow this game down. On Washington's side, obviously a little bit more pass heavy with Jed Fish, but they are a little bit of a balanced offense. It's just Washington State is very aggressively towards the running side of things. But the guys to watch in this game, I think, you talk about this Washington offense, there's so much passing that going on, especially with someone like Will Rogers taking over at quarterback. Jonah Coleman can bury this game for them. Jonah Coleman, if he takes over at that running back position, can just totally take over and make it really, really tough for Washington State to get much of anything going because your offense isn't on the field enough. And when you have a Washington front seven against what Washington State has on that front seven, it's going to be a lot of really, really tough battles for Washington State throughout this game. And if Jonah Coleman gets going on top of that, you're going to have an impossible time stopping this Washington offense. And then on the defensive side of the ball, Zach Durfee is such a talented player. One of those guys that I believe popped up onto the screen during the playoff last year, and I'm sure Washington fans knew him well before that. But in the national standpoint, he really popped onto the scene last year, and very, very talented player. One of those guys that can really keep this quarterback run game for Washington State kind of at bay because he is so dangerous off that edge roll, whether it's pass rushing or holding up against the run or setting an edge. He can do all of that stuff, and that's a huge, huge thing to have, especially against a team that is going to utilize that quarterback run game pretty consistently throughout this one. Over the Washington State side, Kyle Williams is a very talented wide receiver for them. One of those guys that you have to have at least a couple of guys in this game that can play on that level, that can play on the Washington level. This is one of those guys. He plays really, really complete football, very, very smart player, and one of those guys that if Washington lets get free just a couple of times in this game, could totally change it over in a couple of seconds. And then Kapina Gushikin, a very talented DB for Washington State. This is a guy that has been through it a lot. He has been at Washington State for quite some time. He knows what Washington did. He knows what Oregon did, and he knows that they kind of left them in the lurch over there. I'm sure he's bringing that energy into this game. Cannot wait to see what he does. Kind of like I'm blanking on his name right about now, and I will get it here in a second. Kind of like Skylar Thomas on the other side for Oregon State. You're going to have to get a lot from this kid, and the energy from this kid is going to have to be impeccable throughout this one. But let's get into how Washington State can pull this one off. John Mateer has to take over. He is the rushing game for this team in so many different ways. Has 192 yards against Texas Tech a week ago, is the leading rusher on this team, and you're going to have to make sure that he gets loose. It's going to be really, really tough to do against guys like Carson Bruner and against guys like Zach Durfee, but he has to be a factor in this game. There's no two ways about that. If he is not a factor in this game, then there's no shot that Washington State can get this one done. So get him out there on the edge, pick his moments in the passing game, and then hope that this Washington defense does not react the way that you expect. And then hold this pass rush at bay. We talked about Zach Durfee. They've had 8 sacks through 2 games up there at Washington, and granted it was lesser competition, but they're still going to be a little bit outmatched if you're Washington State trying to block these guys. So they're going to have to make sure they at least keep them at bay and at least give John Mateer a little bit of time to digest this defense, because if they're under him in 2 seconds, then the run game won't get going, the quarterback run game won't get going, and a couple of mistakes will definitely come from that. I can promise you that. And then I apologize. And then throw the first punch. That is the biggest thing in this game. Washington's still a little bit unproven. I think they are playing really good football and have some very talented players on that team, but there's still a team that has not been punched yet. There's still a team that has not been hit yet, at least first. And if you can get out into Husky Stadium and get that first touchdown or get that first takeaway, you're going to have the ability to win this game. It's going to be a very tough game, no doubt about it, but the reality is when you look at this group and when you look at what Washington can do, especially in the Husky Stadium, if Washington State does not throw the first punch, then Washington might just be able to roll over them the entire day. Matchups to watch for this one, the Wazoo O-line needs to hold up. They need to be able to keep this Washington D-line at bay because if they don't get a run game going in this one, Washington's going to feast. There's no two ways about that. They're just going to be able to suffocate them, and it's going to be something like 24-6 at the end of the day. But if this O-line can hold up a little bit, then maybe John Mateer and these running backs can get going, and then maybe you have a little bit of a conversation happening around that. And then the Wazoo DBs against Will Rogers is fascinating to me because I think it's a lot of baiting in this game. I think you're trying to get Will Rogers to make that one big mistake that he hasn't made thus far but has been known to make in the past. So the DBs and the defensive coordinator in general are going to have to become ready for this game and are going to have to just try to bait him into a couple of tight throws, a couple of tight windows that look really good at the moment, and then you step in front of it and take it the other way for 6 points. So it's going to be something that likely has to happen in this game is just one mistake from that kid, and those DBs are going to have a ton on their plate to kind of keep track of all of the craziness in Jedd Fisch's offense, that is for sure. And then the Wazoo run game against these Washington linebackers is outright huge. Carson Bruner is one of the best in the entire country, and he's going to have his hands full with two very good running backs coming his way in Jam Griffin and Anthony Hankerson. So it's going to be really awesome to watch this matchup, and frankly, I think Washington State could win this matchup. And if they do, then you're having a really interesting conversation about who can possibly win this game. And I think this one goes down to the wire. I think this one is very, very tough and very tight, but Washington, I do think, pulls away. I think they have an ability and they have a depth, the depth on defense and offense to be able to handle this Washington State offense. I think Washington State has a shot in this game. I just think too many things have to go right for them with John Mateer taking over, where if Washington State just zeroes in on that guy, you're taking away a lot of what Washington State does on offense. So I think Washington State has had a great couple of games to start the year. I think they've done really, really nice things. I think it comes to an end this weekend, and then we'll see what Washington can do going forward. But love seeing these games on the schedule, even though it's not at the end of the year. Still love seeing them on the schedule and hope they continue, even with the new Pac-12 that we will absolutely get into tomorrow. Some great news happening over there on the Pac-12 that we might just get Pac-12 After Dark back. But we'll get into that a little bit more tomorrow. But let's take our third break here. And when we come back, we're going to do a little bit of the questions going into week 3. Did a couple of these yesterday, so if you want to go check that out, definitely do that. But we'll do a couple more today. So we'll break those down right after this, so stick with us.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about the Oregon game as well as the Apple Cup between Washington and Washington State. Cannot wait to see those games on Saturday and hope I get to see them for quite some time to come. But let's get into some questions heading into week 3. We did a couple yesterday if you want to go check that out, but let's get into the couple that I have today because there are a ton of teams that are heading over to Group of 5 opponents this week, and my biggest question for that is just why? Why are you going on the road to a Group of 5 team? Because that is an outright recipe for disaster. And the biggest one this week is Virginia Tech heading to Old Dominion. This is an Old Dominion team that is coming off a game against South Carolina that at the very least they feel confident about. You know, they feel like they probably should have won that game, and at the very least, that instills a little bit of confidence that you can compete with some of these big-time teams, and it's going to be really interesting to see this matchup because Virginia Tech on the other side has not played clean football. They are the team that I was very wrong about in the preseason, and actually I'll probably get into that later, probably next week, talking about where I was right, where I was wrong through 3 weeks of the season, but this is one that I definitely would keep my eye out on, and I don't know why Virginia Tech decided to go up to Old Dominion to play this one, but the other one is Oklahoma State at Tulsa. This is another really tough game, another in-state opponent that very much wants to beat you. So it's one of those games that Oklahoma is coming off a tough emotional win against Arkansas where they did not play elite football by any means. Went to double overtime, very, very tough win, and Tulsa's coming in with nothing to lose. This is their Super Bowl, as people say. This is the one that they want to win pretty much more than any other one on their schedule, and if they can get it, they would be the story of the weekend like NIU was a week ago. So it's a very, very interesting game, and going over to Tulsa to play it makes it all that more interesting. And then we have a game that just outright a good game. We have a game that I don't think there's much division between these teams overall. Cincinnati is heading over to Miami of Ohio, and Cincy's only favored by 3.5 in this game. Miami of Ohio might be the best team in the MAC, and we saw what the MAC can do a week ago. So this is one of those that I wouldn't even be surprised if Miami of Ohio was able to come out here with a win. And it's one of those things that we'll talk about in my hot take segment, that there's a lot of different chances for Group of 5 teams to get a win this upcoming weekend over Power 4 teams. And a couple other examples, Vandy's going to Georgia State, Utah's going to Utah State, although doesn't seem like all that great of a Utah State team, but if you don't have Cam Rising, things get maybe a little bit more interesting. And then BYU at Wyoming, a ton of teams that are heading to Group of 5 opponents, and I just have to think that a couple of these are not going to end very nicely for that group. But the other question I have is, are we being lulled into a false sense of security once again? Last week, all we heard was, this is a week slate, there's going to be no drama, there's only one big game in Texas, Michigan, and then everyone else is like, okay, we'll watch that, not all that interesting. I feel like this week is getting even more of that talk. There are a lot of games that maybe they aren't that marquee, top 25 matchups that we're all like love to see every single week. No doubt about it that this week is a little bit different in terms of the slate. It doesn't mean there can't be craziness out there, because we learned last week there is plenty of craziness that we do not even see coming. So it's one of those things that I think we do this pretty much every single year, especially early on in the year, where we have all these aggressive opinions about teams. We have all these really intense thoughts about these teams that maybe aren't all the way true, because we haven't seen them quite enough for them to feel really like a finished product right about now. So we're looking at this slate and we're saying, maybe it's a favorites week, and I believe I picked a lot of favorites this upcoming week, so maybe I'll be the one with egg on my face on Monday. But at the end of the day, college football is going to keep you on your toes, and this is one of those weeks that I absolutely love, because you got to stay on your toes. There's not a game that really stands out above the bunch, so you can bounce around. You can find the game that is really close in that third quarter and flip over to that one and not feel like you're missing out on anything. So it's kind of a weird diatribe. It's one where you don't really have those big-time games. You don't have those marquee matchups, but you can spread yourself out. You can watch all of college football, and then I almost promise you're going to get a lot of incredible moments. So whenever anyone tells you it's a weak slate, whenever anyone tells you this weekend is straightforward, do not believe them. Just plain and straightforward, do not believe them. It is going to get a little bit crazy this weekend. You're going to want to make sure you're tuned into this one. And then the other question I have is kind of just a general question about college football. Do we need the AP poll this early on? And I'm not necessarily saying we don't need rankings this early on, because obviously we like to talk about stuff. That is kind of the reason that the AP poll comes out so early, is it gives us something to talk about on Monday morning, gives us something to essentially be mad about on Monday morning. So it's one of those things that I fully understand why they do it. I'm not confused by that by any means, but there are so many differences in the way that the AP poll is shaking out throughout the first parts of this year, and the way that it probably should be. When you talk about a team like Clemson, who played a Georgia team and did not play well by any means, but bounced back the next week, beat App State, I'm having a hard time understanding how that team is ranked below Notre Dame right about now. I understand Notre Dame got that win at A&M, and that is a big-time win. I'm not arguing that. They followed that up with a downright terrible performance and lost the worst loss of the entire season thus far. So it's hard for me to say that Clemson is a worse team right this second than Notre Dame. Now, I don't necessarily know if it's the other way around, but the reality is it feels like the AP poll is a lot of just reactionary early on, and then you figure out your, water finds its level at some point. But it's one of those things that every time those first couple of weeks of AP polls come out, you're just looking at it dumbfounded. You have so many different questions about, why is this team top 10? Why is this team over this team? Why was Georgia Tech ranked last week after what we saw from Florida State against Boston College? There are so many different questions that I have around the way that they go about the AP poll, and I'm going to still put out my rankings. I still think you can put out rankings, but if you're going to add 25 teams into this thing this early on, there's going to be a lot of issues. That just plain and simple. So I think 10, maybe 12 up until week 4, and then you expand it. I think that would be a normal way to go about business. Now, I have no thought that this is going to change by any means. I have no thought that they are going to listen to me and totally change the way they go about business. But man, this year in particular, it feels like the AP poll is just getting to my wit's end. I'm getting a little bit tired of some of the AP polls that I'm seeing early on, so just wanted to get that off my chest just a little bit this right now. But the thing I want to talk about next is this the week of coaching narratives. We look around the schedule, there are so many different games that maybe don't jump off the page in terms of the teams, but there are so many coaches that are coming into this week just to having a little bit of a side eye from their AD right about now. I think South Carolina LSU at South Carolina is a spot where either one of these coaches could be in a very interesting spot watching this after this game. And I don't necessarily think they'll be on the hot seat after this game, but a lot of LSU fans are getting very frustrated with what's going on with Brian Kelly. That's just plain and simple. I've seen plenty of them getting mad, including the guy T-Bob Herbert, who is an absolute beast and leads the LSU fan base as far as I'm concerned. But South Carolina on the other side, Shane Beamer did a great job last week. No doubt about that. If LSU comes in and railroads you this week, then you're right back to the way you felt after the Old Dominion game. So it's a very interesting conversation where it felt like Shane Beamer kind of bought himself a little bit of time last week, but it might just come right back down to earth this upcoming week. And then every time we talk about this, we have to talk about Billy Napier. And I kind of hate it because I kind of want to leave him alone for a little bit, but the reality is this is a win that he likely just outright needs. If he does not get this win, he will lose this fan base. I feel very, very confident in that, and this fan base will be fully ready to ship him off, and it won't necessarily be them wanting to wait until the end of the season to do it either. So it's going to be really interesting, this one, and Billy Napier has pressure on him from the second he wakes up to the second he goes to sleep every night, but especially on Saturday, he's going to have to execute nearly perfectly or they're going to be in a lot of trouble. I'll just be totally honest. But there's another guy in Florida that has a lot to prove this week, and that's Mike Norvell. I think this is an interesting game because I don't think Mike Norvell is near the hot seat. I don't think he is someone that is going to get fired at the end of the year. I do think there are some issues that need to be fixed, and I do think some of those issues are going to be really hard to fix if you start 0-3 and go into an ACC schedule where you can't even guarantee a win over Syracuse. You can't even guarantee a win over Wake Forest. So it's going to be really interesting to watch this, and that's actually my next question is, what happens if Florida State falls this weekend? What does everyone react as, and how does that Florida State fan base handle this? Because the reality is, this is not a program that is in a position where you can just get to the end of the year, reset next year, and be totally fine. Because they have issues that need to be fixed that are going to take time. They have to be able to go into the high school ranks to recruit way more often than they do right now, because that's the big issue with this team. You have so many transfers coming in that you don't really have any depth behind them that is confident in this system. So this team looks very clunky, and the depth doesn't look all that better because you don't have guys that have been there for very long. So it's one of those things that you're likely going to have to lean a little bit more into recruiting and lean a little bit further away from the portal. And that doesn't happen overnight. You have to put together a couple of really good seasons to get to the place that they're going to have to get to, because you have Miami climbing. You have Florida doing weirdly good work on the recruiting trail, although that could come to a screeching halt pretty quickly. The reality is, Florida State has so many different things to change. And if they lose this weekend, they have Notre Dame, they have Clemson, they have Miami on the schedule, they have Florida at the end of the year. They are not in a position to where if they lose this game where they couldn't lose a couple of recruits along the process, and then you're in a position at the end of the year where you're saying, well, we have to go back into the portal. We have to build a team again through the portal and just see where the chips fall in 2025. So it's going to be a really, really interesting next rest of the year if they do fall on Saturday, because then you got a lot of recruits asking questions that you do not need them asking right about now if you're Florida State, because you need those guys on the field immediately. So it's going to be interesting to watch this one. Florida State has to make some big program changes, and they have a lot of work to do that. And then finally, what quarterbacks need to deliver this weekend? I think Tyler Van Dyke is the number one answer. He has to play elite football. He might just have to play the game of his life on Saturday if they want to get this one done. Very, very talented player, but we haven't quite seen a lot from him the last couple of years. He is someone that really needs to perform, and I think a lot of that O-line needs to be a little bit better against this Alabama D-line, but he has to hit open receivers. He has to be able to hit those big-time moments that he has been really, really tough at throughout his career, and especially the last couple of years. And then Connor Wegman is another guy that just needs to play well. There are so many fans in that A&M fan base that are questioning how good this guy is, if he's someone that can really lead them to the promised land, and this would be a place to kind of prove a little bit of that wrong. Go into the swamp, get a big-time win, play really good football. A lot of people are right back on the Connor Wegman bandwagon, and I might be right there with them. And then we talked about him, but John Mateer is another guy to watch in this group. Has to put on a show for Wazoo if they're going to be able to win that Apple Cup. But overall, I think there's a ton of questions going into this weekend, and we'll get a lot of answers. It'll be fun to watch this unfold, but let's take our last break here. We're taking a little bit too much time here, so we'll try to speed through this last one, but let's take our last break, and when we come back, we're going to get into the Hot Take Thursday. We're going to get into all of the takes I have for Week 3 and a couple of big-time performances and a game going on tonight that might just be one of the games of the week, but we'll break that down right after this, so stick with us. Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just broke down some of the questions that I have going into this week. I think it's a huge week for quarterbacks. It's also a huge week for coaching narratives where a lot of fans are going to make some very aggressive opinions at the end of this weekend, one way or the other, for their coaches. So, going to be fascinating to watch that, but let's get into some hot takes I have going into this week. There are a couple of games that I think might just be a little bit overlooked. I think we're going to learn a lot about what Colorado is this upcoming weekend, but let's start with that game tonight. Arizona State going over to Texas State to play a very, very fun one. I know these two teams don't necessarily jump off the page when you see them. These is going to be a very, very fun game. When a line is 1.5 ASU and the over-under is 59.5, you're going to have a lot of fun. There's going to be plenty of points scored in this one, and there's going to be plenty of back and forth. Frankly, this might be the most fun game of the entire weekend. So you're going to want to tune in at 7:30 Eastern to make sure you get this one in. And I think it's one of those games where you have a guy coming in for Jordan McLeod on the other side that is just so dangerous. He's one of those guys that it doesn't matter who he's on the football field with. He thinks he can compete with you. He thinks he can absolutely go punch for punch with you. And frankly, he probably can with a lot of these teams that he's going to face off against this year. And then on the other side, you have Scadaboo, who's just doing ridiculous stuff all over the field. Anytime that those two guys step on the field, you're going to want to be tuned in, just plain and simple. This is a very interesting Arizona State team that is playing better football around this time of year than I thought they would. I thought they would be a team that kind of develops into what they were going to be, but they came out of the gate screaming, and I think it's one of those things where, although the Mississippi State game isn't outright crazy that they won that game, but still a very impressive performance, and still an SEC team coming to your house and being able to handle business is a big deal and sets them up for a lot of success in the Big 12, but it could come to an end in San Marcos tonight if they do not have their P's and Q's about them, because there are a lot of talented players on that Texas State offense, including Jordan McLeod. Chris Don Jr. had an incredible game last week, and he's one of those guys that they're going to feed the ball to him. There's no two ways about that. Arizona State, if you're going to beat them, you're going to have to get those big-time plays, and that's likely going to be the way that you do that is getting the ball to Chris Don Jr. And then Arizona State, it's all about the run game. They're going to try to batter them. They're going to try to beat them into submission, and they might just be successful in that with all of the running backs that they have to throw out there. But overall, I think this is one of those games that you might just be overlooking just a little bit tonight. It's worth turning this on, no doubt about it. Along with the Thursday night matchup, I'm not necessarily saying take away from that by any means, but if you're only a college football guy, not so much an NFL guy, this is the one you're going to want to tune into. I can promise you that. I think Jalen Milroe is going to be the story of the weekend. He's going up to Madison, Wisconsin, where it's kind of a funny spot. I think Alabama is comfortably the better team in this game. I think they have the better players pretty much across the board at every single position. I also think it's a big enough game to where a lot of people are going to be watching. A lot of people are going to be tuned into this one and seeing what this team can do. And frankly, I think this offense has not quite found itself. And I know that sounds crazy with some of the different plays that have been made over the last couple of weeks and all of the different incredible down the field passes. But the reality is Jalen Milroe has a certain skill set. He's going to be able to run the ball. He throws a very pretty deep ball. Everything else is very questionable at the very least. And I think Kalen DeBoer is still kind of figuring that out. I think he's still kind of figuring out that with this O-line that is still kind of finding itself, you're likely going to need Jalen Milroe's legs in this offense if you're going to be successful on the ground. And I think he's figuring out that if he's going to be able to utilize Jalen Milroe's throwing ability, the run game has to get going, and you have to utilize this guy in different ways and make it more difficult for this defense to know what's coming, because then that's when that guy's dangerous. That's when that guy is able to open up things in the pass game, is when they have to worry about him running the ball. So I expect him to see a lot more of Jalen Milroe out on the outside making plays with his legs, and that's when he's dangerous. I think he's going to put up just ridiculous numbers this upcoming weekend, and I think when we walk out of this weekend, he's going to be one of the names that we're talking about around the Heisman. Now, how long that lasts with Georgia coming to town in a couple of weeks is a question, but as of right now, I expect him to be the outright story of the weekend. Another thing that I think we'll learn a ton about Colorado this upcoming weekend. I think we're going to learn really who this program is, top to bottom, in a lot of different ways. They're coming off a game where they just got punched in the mouth. There's no two ways about that. And this week has become one of the biggest weeks for Deion since he's shown up at Colorado. And I know that sounds a little bit crazy, but the reality is you just got punched in the mouth on the road. You have so much of this outside noise, some of it fair, some of it not remotely fair. But the reality is you're walking into this game where a Colorado State team really wants to beat you. We saw some comments from Torrey Horton and Braden Fowler-Nicolosi going into this game. They want to beat you bad. They very, very much want to beat you, and you're going to their place to play this game. It is going to take a toughness. It is going to take a grit. It is going to take a culture that we just haven't quite seen from Colorado thus far throughout the season. Doesn't mean that they don't have it. Doesn't mean that they can't dig deep, but they're really going to have to in this game. And especially with Shiloh Sanders not playing in this game, they're going to need some help from that back end of that defense. So it's one of those things that we've heard all of the noise for the past week. We heard about Shedeur Sanders leaving the field early, although I think that was mostly injury related. We heard about him throwing his offensive lineman under the bus. I didn't necessarily love that. I don't necessarily think he was wrong, but I also don't think you say that in a press conference, because then your O-line is a little bit more disenthused than they already were. So I don't necessarily love the way he handled that, but he did clarify his comments, kind of handled it very nicely, so not necessarily going to hold anything against him there. But the reality is there's so much noise around this program right now, because the reality is everyone's waiting for you to lose that game. There is no world where you don't have a lot of people around Colorado that are waiting for you to fail. That's just the reality of what Deion has built over there, and it's the reality they're going to have to live with. And if they fall this week, there's going to be a lot of people burying that program. There's going to be a lot of people saying that Deion is going to jump ship at the end of the year. There's going to be a lot of talk that they do not have to deal with. So we're going to learn a lot. We're going to learn how tough this team is. We're going to learn how much culture this team has, and we're going to learn if they can refocus after just getting absolutely railroaded a week ago against Nebraska. So very interesting performance for Shedeur and for this entire program. And when we come out of it, we're going to have some very interesting opinions around Colorado, I feel like. But The other guy that I think is going to be a huge talking point this weekend is Avery Johnson. I think he starts his Heisman campaign tomorrow night against Kansas State. Or against Arizona, not against Kansas State. I like this Arizona team. I think they are very dynamic on the offensive side of the ball. The thing is, they struggle to keep running quarterbacks at bay. And Devin Dampier had over 100 yards rushing in week 1 against them. And KSU just needs to unlock Avery Johnson's legs. He has not been utilized that way at all this season thus far, and they're not going to be able to run the ball the way that they need to in Big 12 play if he is not a part of that offense. So you got to get this guy going. You got to get him out there on the edge and making plays, and if they do, I think he's going to put up just an incredible performance in this game. So I think Avery Johnson's one of those guys that he was coming into the season with all of this hype around his running ability and what he can do on the ground. Haven't necessarily seen it yet. And I think, frankly, when everyone does see it on full display tomorrow night, I think they're going to really buy into this guy in a hurry. I think he's one of those guys that a lot of people want to buy in on Heisman, and I think he's going to give you a really good reason to on Friday night. Very talented player, and I think once they start utilizing his legs just a little bit more, he's one of the most dangerous players in the entire country. I think multiple group of 5 teams are going to knock off Power 4 teams this weekend. We talked about this earlier on where I don't know why so many teams are going away from their home to play these games, including the game tonight. Arizona State going to San Marcos to play Texas State. Outright ridiculous. You are just asking for a disaster to happen, but there's so many different opportunities for this to happen. Texas State is obviously one that I'm watching very closely, with that line only being 1.5 in Arizona State's direction, but Vandy's going to Georgia State, which is a really solid Georgia State team. Not perfect by any means, and Vandy should win that game, but Vandy's been rolling very smoothly right now. Maybe Georgia State can throw a rock into the way. And then Utah, without Cam Rising, is heading up to Utah State. Maybe that one gets a little bit more interesting than we think. And then obviously BYU at Wyoming is a very fascinating one. We saw Wyoming take care of business against Texas Tech last year at Wyoming, and maybe the same thing happens this time around. So we have so many different moments. Tulsa, Oklahoma State is another great moment for a possible upset, but the reality is there is just too many spots for me this upcoming weekend that I can't pick this. There are so many guys. There are so many teams that can make some noise from the group of 5 level. I think there are a couple on here, Texas State and Miami of Ohio over Cincy, that wouldn't even be all that crazy. They would be pretty relatively normal matchups that, yes, the underdog won, but not that much of an underdog in either of those games. So I feel pretty good about this one. Maybe it's not quite as hot as I want it to be, but I do think the group of 5 continues to make a really good statement about maybe they deserve one of those buys when you get around to college football playoff time. Obviously needs a lot of more things to fall into place, but getting these big-time wins early could make all the difference. And then I think Oregon sends a message this weekend. We talked about it earlier. I made my pick, and I'm picking them by a ton over over Oregon State. But the reality is, they know they need to flip the switch. The first 2 weeks were nowhere near where they need to be on the O-line, but just from an effort perspective, they were nowhere near where they need to be when they get into Big 12 play, and I think it was a little bit of just looking forward. It was a little bit of them getting caught up in, we have the Big 10 coming up, and we have to be ready for those games, and we have to make sure that we can hold our own, that we're not going to exhaust ourselves through 2 weeks. And it's not to say that they didn't, work really hard in those games, because especially that Boise State game, they had to down the stretch. But the reality is, I think they're keeping a lot in. I think they're holding a lot back in. I think they got to unleash it this weekend. Not necessarily because they need it to beat Oklahoma State, Oregon State, but I do think they need it to just prove everyone that they are still that team, to prove everyone that they are a national title contender, and if they don't do it this week, then there are a lot of people that would just outright write off Oregon going into Big Ten play. So it's one of those things that Dan Lanning knows what this is about. He knows that his team has not played remotely good enough football, and he knows that people are asking a million different questions about them in the media and all around them. They need to show that they are still that team. They need to show that they're a team that can outright dominate someone on the other side of the field, and they're going to have enough of a spotlight to get it done because of this game being that old matchup that we all miss so much. There's going to be plenty of people watching, including myself, and I better see Oregon come out there with their hair on fire, because if they come out sluggish once again through 3 weeks, I'm no longer asking a question of, can Oregon compete in the Big Ten? I'm asking the question of, can Oregon even beat the teams that they're expecting to beat this upcoming year? Can they beat the Michigan States that are going to come out there with their hair on fire, are going to come out there being fully ready to go and wanting to make a statement against a team that, as of through 2 weeks, just looks a little bit disenthused and looks like they're not giving the effort that they need to down the stretch of the season, or they're going to be in just so much trouble. I like this Oregon team. I still think they're very capable, and I do think they will make the statement this upcoming weekend, but if they don't, there is a lot of very interesting conversations going on around Eugene. But overall, I think there's so many different things to talk about as we head into week 3. Tomorrow is going to be a little bit of a different show with all the different stuff happening around the sport right about now, with realignment kind of rearing its ugly head right about now. But we'll get into all of that tomorrow, so definitely check that out. But that'll do it for this edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. Your support means a lot to us, so please remember to subscribe to the show, leave a positive review. It does make a huge difference for us. Also, follow us on Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, all the social pages for all the content and updates you could possibly need. We have really incredible people doing awesome work across every single sport you could want. So anything in the world of sports that you need, come on over to GSMC and we have you totally covered. But thank you once again for listening, and I will see you guys tomorrow.